So we're not going to talk about lasagna gardening today. We're going to talk about landscaping for birds, butterflies, and pollinators. But we can use some of the same concepts. I don't really like standing at the podium. Can everyone hear me okay? I may step away. If you can't hear me, just raise your hand, and I'll move back. But over in the top left, we have the Baltimore Oriole. If people are not familiar with that, we have the giant swallowtail or eastern swallowtail here. Oh, great. All right, so this is even better. Down in the left, we have the painted bunting, and over here on the right, we have monarch butterflies. So these are the critters that we're trying to attract to our yard, or at least that I'm trying to attract to my yard. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about butterflies and wildflowers and grasses. Many people do not associate butterflies with anything other than wildflowers. But once you learn about butterflies, and there's a great book back here by John and Gloria Tweeten, Butterflies of Houston and Southeast Texas. If you don't have that, I highly recommend that if you're interested in attracting butterflies. So for those of you that like companion plantings, I like this lance-leaf coreopsis and the larkspur, Carolina larkspur, the blue and the yellow together. In the middle, we have one of our purple coneflower species that we have. We don't have those today. And then on the right, we have Indian grass. This is the seed for Indian grass, which we do have over here this afternoon. And I'll talk a little bit more about Indian grass later. Okay, so I think one of the #1 plants that you can plant for butterflies in terms of at least providing a nectar source for them is this blue mist flower. And we have a good collection of it back here. So how many butterflies are on here? Somebody give me a quick count. Now, most of these are monarchs, and you know, monarchs are like the poster child for butterflies, and rightfully so. Their numbers have declined significantly in the last 50 years for sure, and 10 years also. However, many other species of butterflies use this blue mist flower as a nectar source. Now, if we want to attract butterflies, we need to plant something other than just a nectar source, and we do have the 2 species of milkweed, the Asclepias genus, back here for those that want to plant milkweed as a host plant for monarchs. Now, I would highly recommend the green milkweed. That's going to be the milkweed that you have the least difficulty growing in the Houston area. Another great flower we have is the gay flower or liatris, which we have. You can see those, they're blooming right now. We have several species of liatris that grow in Texas area. Some bloom in the spring, some late summer and fall. So these are the ones that's blooming now. And of course, one of the things that we always want to do in attracting birds, butterflies, and pollinators is to provide a year-round resource of food, shelter, water, and for birds nesting for them. So if we plant with the idea of having spring blooming flowers, summer blooming, and fall blooming, we're doing a good job of providing habitat for birds, butterflies, and pollinators. Gulf muley or purple love grass will give you this kind of a look right here. And I personally think this is very attractive from an aesthetic and landscape point of view. So you can use our native grasses as an edging, if you will, instead of lorope or liriope, as some people say, or monkey grass, also called. We don't have to use that. We can use our native grasses. Okay, so we have both purple love grass and Gulf muley available today. That's what it looks like. Actually, 2 of my favorite plants out of I have 500 favorite plants, but these are 2 of my favorite. Is knotroot bristlegrass. Knotroot bristlegrass. That's a great, beautiful little, looks like a bottle brush, if you will, on the top. That's the seed head. You can see a couple seeds in there. Lots of our wintering sparrows and some of our other birds that I'll show you in just a minute feed on seeds of grasses as well as other plants. The butterfly that's pictured here is a phaon crescent. The phaon crescent uses this frog fruit that you see right here as a host plant. Here's a close-up of frog fruit. The old name was Phylla incisa. It's now known as Phylla nudiflora. How many people have frog fruit? Fantastic. It's a great ground cover. Any place you have Asiatic jasmine, replace it with frog fruit. Any place that you need to filler, just a low-growing filler, put in frog fruit. It's a great plant. Now, it's almost as good as the blue mistflower for a nectar source for many species of butterflies, so it's really a great plant to have. That's what it looks like as the ground cover. If you've ever been out on the TxDOT's highways, you can look on the slope of the road, get, say, 100 miles outside of Houston. Nobody goes out there and waters that. They don't go out there and fertilize that. They don't go out there and pull weeds. And you can find frog fruit growing along the road. So it's very drought tolerant and hardy. Lantana. Anybody grow lantana? Okay, that's a great butterfly attractant also. It's primarily a source for nectar. However, if you've noticed, lantana does produce a seed casing, little fruit, what we call the fruit. So some bird species will use the fruit in the fall, especially mockingbirds and cardinals will eat those. So it's a dual-purpose plant. Anybody have any questions so far? Am I going too fast? Okay, so if you don't have questions, maybe I'll ask you questions. How's that? Will that work? So one of the butterflies that you're going to attract to your yard is the most abundant, most numerous butterfly that we have, which is the Gulf fritillary. Now, it uses passion flower as a host plant, but it uses other plants as a nectar source. Here we have on the Salvia coccinea, right here in the lower right, that it's getting nectar from. You see the caterpillar here on the left, which would be on a passion flower vine if you have that. One of my favorite, again, in my top 500, is this bee balm, or Monarda. That's a close-up view of it, and this is what it looks like growing along the roadsides or in a field. So you can make a nice little pocket prairie in your own backyard, or there's lots of places where people have an adjacent area that might be like a ditch area or a drainage area for Harris County Flood Control District, and you can utilize that too. Don't tell them I said so, but you can take advantage of that. They mow it about twice a year. Another great plant to have, especially for pollinators, is goldenrod. Now, there are several species of goldenrod that grow in Texas. We have 2 today, if you want to pick those. And this is what it looks like as a small little grouping. Goldenrod makes a great plant, or is a great plant, if you want to plant something as an accent plant in a tall pot or a large pot. You can grow it in a large, wide pot or a tall pot. It's quite beautiful. Here it is with all the pollinators. So it attracts a number of pollinators, variety species. Also, I've noticed in my yard, the orange-crowned warbler, which I don't have a photo of, actually either eats a lot of the seeds that's on this plant in the fall or eats the beetles and other insects that are eating the seeds in the fall. So it's a dual-purpose plant also. If you have a little wet area or an area that maybe your sprinkler just runs a little bit longer, or the drainage is not very good, and so it stays really moist and damp in that area, or maybe you want to create a moist bog area. Swamp sunflower is a great plant to have. Typically it grows around 3 feet tall, but in the right conditions it can grow about 4 or 5 feet tall. It blooms profusely in the fall. Right now it's blooming. If you go out to Brazos Bend State Park and look around some of the ditches outside Houston, you can see it blooming in the ditches and things like that. So it's a great, beautiful sunflower. We don't utilize sunflowers enough in our landscaping. So we have many other species. Another one that I would recommend, we don't have it though, is Maximilian sunflower. Blooms in the fall also. But the swamp sunflower would be a great addition to a moist bog or a wet area. Salt marsh mallow. I first saw this growing in Galveston in a ditch by a golf course. And nobody was taking care of that. It was just out there growing on its own. So this is a great plant that doesn't need any babying. You can just plant it. It needs some moisture, and it'll take care of itself. Beautiful pink blooms. Not many flowers in the nursery trade are pink. Another great plant to have that you can see growing along roadsides and ditches or in marsh areas is spider lily. This grows from a tuber, so it's not going to have necessarily a seed that you'll see, but butterflies will use it and other pollinators will use it. You can see what it looks like down here in the field. You can see these some places out on the Katy Prairie. Jaime was talking about that earlier. I do some trips for the Katy Prairie Conservancy out there, and in the right time of year, like fall right now and springtime, actually late summer, you can see these blooming out on the prairie like they look here. That's a close-up of it there. This is also a good plant to use if you don't have a large area, like some people may have a townhouse or a condo, or even in an apartment. You could grow this plant in a container. Now, of course, you'd have to seal the bottom of it and keep the water from draining out so quickly, but it would grow well in a container. We mentioned Indian grass earlier. I gave you the shot of what the seed head looks like. This is what the plant looks like. And again, many people do not associate butterflies with grasses, but many species of butterflies use grasses, especially our native grasses, as host plants. That is, they lay their eggs on the grass, and when the egg hatches into a caterpillar, they eat some part of that plant. So Indian grass is a great plant to plant if you have either a pot that you can grow it in. You'll need a deep pot because grasses have deep roots, or an area that would take this. Now, this is not one I would plant where in your wet area. If you have a really wet area, eastern gamma grass would be better than Indian grass. But many times people are looking for something that'll do well in a dry area. So this would be, Indian grass would be a great plant to plant in a dry area, full sun or light shade, afternoon sun, morning sun. 4 or 5 hours of sun is what it needs. Now, in the wintertime, we have many species of sparrows that move down to Texas, and many of those birds are seed eaters primarily, not many insects in the wintertime, so they eat a lot of seeds. Also in migration, we have buntings coming through, and grasses are the plants that many of these birds utilize, not only for food, but also for shelter. Here's another great plant to have, little blue stem. Now, we have big blue stem and little blue stem for sale. By the way, Indian grass typically grows anywhere from around 5 feet to 8 feet tall. Little blue stem is in the range of 2.5 to 4.5 feet tall. Big blue stem anywhere from 6 to 12 feet tall. So just know the growth requirements of that plant, not only for the soil conditions, and all the plants we're talking about today will do well in all those 10 ecoregions. Well, not the water ecoregions that were talked about, but all the land regions that we talked about were this morning. These plants will do well in all those ecozones. So you don't really have to worry about the soil conditions that much, but certainly the water and the sun requirements are important. What makes this plant so beautiful is and unfortunately, a lot of these lights kind of wash out the coloring on this plant, but it's a gorgeous kind of almost turquoise blue color in the springtime when it sends up new growth. In the fall, it turns a beautiful copper color. Now, just sticking a native plant in the ground does not really create habitat. It does help the birds, and it does help pollinators and butterflies by providing a resource of food for them and maybe some shelter, but you really need more than just a few plants. You need to add the structure. And this is a great example of structure that is suitable for birds as well as pollinators and other butterflies. So you can see how it's layered. If we look down here toward the bottom, right in this area here, lower grasses and low flowers, we have a larger, taller group of flowers here, and then taller flowers, and even taller flowers back here. So if you do a staging like this, different levels, and you can do this vertically with vines as well as tall growing plants. So try to create some structure here, if you will, in your landscaping. This is the kind of habitat that gives birds an opportunity to get in and seek shelter out of the sun or get away from a predator. Or many birds, like your mockingbirds and your cardinals and blue jays, will feed out in the open, but other birds like wood thrushes, they like to be underneath some shelter. So this just creates a different kind of microhabitat for birds that are coming through. And by the way, fall migration is underway, so if you're out and about, you can start looking for some of these birds. Like this blue grosbeak. They fly across the Gulf of Mexico. When they arrive coming in the springtime, they're exhausted, they need food. That's why we need to be planting native plants, because most of these birds, they can utilize some non-native plants, but they really benefit most if they have the native vegetation to feed on. Now this is primarily a fruit eater, so plants that produce any kind of a fruit like well, you know, like coral honeysuckle does that, smilax does that. Any kind of a berry-producing plant will help the blue grosbeak. Indigo bunting is another seed eater that comes through, and they're moving through right now. Both of these birds are moving through in the fall, headed back into Mexico, Central America, and South America. We call these our birds, but they spend a lot of time in migration and spending their winter months in Mexico, Central America, and South America. But in the springtime, when they're coming back through in mass numbers and large groups, you can easily find these birds in weedy fields or patches like we just saw a moment ago. So create the structure, add the food resources, and you may well attract some of these birds. Now, if you're living in the heart of downtown Houston, not likely to get these, but if you're on the outskirts and some of the suburbs, you can. Of course, this is the painted bunting, one of the most sought after birds. For those people that come from other countries, which, you know, I have a touring business, so I'm a guide, bird guide. This is always one of the top birds that people want to see, painted bunting. Can you give me 10 good reasons why they'd want to see this? What do you think the second bird is high on the list most often would be? Cardinal. And we take cardinals for granted. We see them in our backyards. Yeah, it's another cardinal. But people that don't have them, I had some people last year come from Oregon. They don't have cardinals in Oregon. That was high on their list. People coming from Europe where they don't have cardinals, cardinals are high on their list. So painted bunting and cardinals, take time to enjoy your garden as the birds and butterflies move through. Many people do not associate, as I said before, butterflies with trees, but a lot of butterflies use various trees, including oaks and pines, willows, and this toothache tree. I love the scientific name of this. This is Xanthoxylum clavihercules. That's a mouthful, but it's kind of a cool name. So this is what the plant looks like growing in the wild. You can plant these in your yard, and you might say, well, why would I want to plant these in my yard? Well, I'm kind of like an outlier kind of individual, and I like things that's different. So this has a different kind of bark. So I love the bark on this. Now, this is not one that you would want to, plant for your son or daughter to climb up in, but it's a great tool to teach them about how plants evolve to protect themselves. So I love the bark on this. I also love, now this is not the leaf of this is lime prickly ash, which we don't have, but this is a caterpillar, if you can't tell. It may look like a bird dropping, and that's for a reason, because if it looked like a bird dropping, birds are probably not going to eat it. So that's another beautiful thing about what we call mimicry. Okay, so this caterpillar on either the toothache tree that we just talked about, lime prickly ash, or the common hop tree, which we have here, will turn into this giant swallowtail. So that's why we would want to plant the toothache tree. If you're interested in planting for hummingbirds, this is probably one of the best plants that you can plant for the ruby-throated hummingbird, which about 90% of the hummingbirds that we get in Texas are ruby-throated hummingbirds. So it's this single species that migrates from Mexico and Central America into North America, Eastern North America to breed, and then migrates out again. Migration is just beginning now for this species. Anybody seen a ruby-throated hummingbird? What do you think that bird would need before it made the 600-mile flight across the Gulf of Mexico? What do you think it would need? Lots of food. Okay, so these hummingbirds do what we call stage. That is, they come to the Gulf of Mexico and they know that's a long trek and there's no bushes and shrubs out there to feed on. So they do what's called bulk up. They feed and feed and feed, and they can double their weight. Now, we're not talking about going from 100 pounds to 200 pounds. These guys are tiny, but they can double their weight. I feel like I'm getting ready to migrate myself, but anyway, I do like food. So they need as much food resources that they can get. And as we develop the coast, and you would think there's nothing else that could be developed along the coast. Wrong. There's lots of development planned for the upper Texas Gulf Coast over the next 25 years. So we as individuals, although we can't restore the Katy Prairie, we can't restore lots of the marshes that's already been lost, we can do things to help birds and butterflies and pollinators by getting involved in planting in our own backyard, by getting involved with your local park, your homeowners association, and encouraging them to plant plants that benefit the hummingbirds and butterflies that need these resources. So this is one of the best plants you can plant for hummingbirds. And why do I say that, especially for the ruby-throated hummingbird? A woman in Tennessee did a research project for her PhD on hummingbirds, ruby-throated hummingbird, and cardinal flower, and her conclusion was that the cardinal flower depends approximately 90% on the ruby-throated hummingbird for pollination. There are a few other insects, or not other insects, but a few insects that pollinate this plant, but 90% of the pollination occurs through contact with ruby-throated hummingbird. So if we lose the cardinal flower, we're probably not going to lose the ruby-throated hummingbird, but it certainly would have lost a major source of food for that bird. But if we lose the hummingbird, we're probably going to lose the lose the cardinal flower also. That's that ecology of the relationship between plants and birds is an area of special interest to me. So that's pretty cool. This is a very common plant that you can find in the nursery trade. Coral and honeysuckle. Most people think about a vine growing up, but you can also use it as like a ground cover and spread it out on the ground. You can use it to do an arbor with and create an entranceway. So there are lots of applications for it. It's a great plant for hummingbirds. Crossvine. We have the crossvine back here. This is a nice, very subtle maple scent to crossvine. I love that if you stand underneath a tree. I planted one in my backyard underneath an oak tree because it grows in the shade, so to speak. It can't grow in full sun, but it needs more water. I planted it under the oak tree, and I could go out and look up in the oak tree, and I could see bits and pieces of the crossvine up there, the yellow that's in there, as you can see. And when the flowers would fall to the ground, I could find them, pick them up, and smell them, and they were just great. But I didn't really have a full understanding of what was going on. I needed to replace the roof on my house, so I'm kind of a curious kind of guy anyway, and so I wanted to see what the roofers were doing, so I climbed up on the two-story house to see what the roofers were doing. And I happened to look over in my backyard, and the top of my live oak tree was covered in these blooms. So that's what the ruby-throated hummingbird would see coming over. I mean, you see as many flowers here, they were 10 times that many flowers on the top of that live oak, so it was gorgeous. So I highly recommend this crossvine. Remember we talked about providing plants that bloom throughout the year. This is fall blooming obedient plant. We have a spring blooming obedient plant also. So you could plant both of those. One would bloom in the spring, this one blooms in the fall. It's, again, a good plant for hummingbirds and butterflies and pollinators. It can take full sun, it can take standing water, gumbo, clay. All of these plants do very well in the general conditions that we have in our backyards. Now, the coral honeysuckle doesn't like as much water as the crossvine or some of the others, but other than that, it's not a problem. Oh, isn't this, this is beautiful. This is blue sage, Salvia azura. This is one of our most beautiful salvias, I think. And tell you a little story. The first time I ever really saw this in the Houston area. I'd seen it growing outside of the Houston area, but I was living up off of 290. Anybody know where that is? 290? It's way out. Okay. Inside the loop, sometimes people don't get out. So 290 and West Road. And I was driving by this area, and there was 2 car dealerships on. There's at an intersection you have four corners or 4 sections. So there was only 2 car dealerships, so we needed another car dealership there. And so they were putting a large Honda dealership there, which has since closed. But so anyway, they were beginning to landscape it, that is, bulldoze it. And I saw this salvia blooming out there one afternoon on my way home. And I said, I've got to come this weekend and dig that up and transplant it. By the time weekend came, it was totally gone. It was prairie. It was all prairie. We talked about prairie a lot this morning. That whole section was all prairie, but it was gone in a matter of 3 or 4 days. So if you can plant this, this is great. This is really, I get outdoors a lot I mean, I'm guiding birding trips and plant classes and stuff like that, so I get out a lot. You don't see this plant in the wild very often. How many have seen it growing in the wild? See it, show of hands? Okay, a few of you have, yeah. So that's great. Go on some of the field trips with the Native Plant Society if you want to see these plants growing in the wild. Orchard oriole, this is a bird that's migrating through right now for fall. It'll be migrating through again in the spring. This trumpet creeper, which we're not selling, a lot of people don't appreciate it, but this is a major food source for the orchard oriole and the ruby-throated hummingbird in the fall. It's blooming right now, and orchard orioles, as well as Baltimore orioles, eat a lot of nectar from tubular-shaped flowers, just like hummingbirds. Anybody seen this orchard oriole? Great, there's more birders in here than I thought. Okay, rough-leaf dogwood. Let me see a show of hands of those people growing rough-leaf dogwood. Awesome. Still not enough, though. So all those that didn't raise your hand, I want you to buy a rough-leaf dogwood. Okay, so this is really, there's two trees, and I'll talk about the other one later. No, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to mention it. I don't have a slide of it. There's two trees in Houston area that are undervalued, underappreciated, and misrepresented in the nursery trade. One is rough-leaf dogwood. The other is hackberry. Okay? If you want to really benefit birds, butterflies, and pollinators using trees, if you need a tree, rough-leaf dogwood and hackberry, I think, are the two best trees that you could plant. Hackberry produces a fruit in the fall. There's about a guy by the name of R.A. Vines. Anybody ever heard of R.A. Vines? He wrote a book on plants, and in that he says 47 species of birds eat hackberry. I think there's 51, okay? I think there's 51. So now on rough-leaf dogwood, this is what it looks like. As you can see, this is an area that's planted in a man-made habitat, so that's fine. It's usually multi-trunked. Notice that it's cleaned around, there's no suckers out there, which this plant does do. It does produce runners and suckers. That's one of the reasons people don't like it. However, if you cut those suckers once a year, it's not a problem. And people say, well, that's a maintenance issue that I don't want to deal with. But if you looked in the same people that say that, if you looked in their yard, you'd probably see either red-tip Rutinia or crepe myrtle or Burford holly or Japanese boxwood that gets cut more times than once a year. So in my mind, there's no reason not to plant rough-leaf dogwood. Here's the flower, blooms in the spring, fantastic for all kinds of pollinators, bees, flies, honeybees, butterflies, many species of insects use this plant. The other good thing about this plant is it doesn't grow too tall. It likes light shade. It can grow in full sun, but it needs a richer soil and more water. Its preferred habitat is really light shade, morning sun, afternoon sun, or light shade throughout the day. So oftentimes people have live oaks, but they don't have, and so they have lots of shade, but they don't have many plants that they can plant underneath. This is one that you can plant underneath a live oak, and it would do fine. Okay, so here's the fruit of the rough-leaf dogwood. If you try to plant the Florida dogwood, Cornus florida, which is a beautiful flower, well, it's technically, it's not, the flower's not so beautiful, it's the bract of the flower that's beautiful. We all love that, but it doesn't do well in Houston. For the most part, there's a couple areas where you have some real sandy soil along Buffalo Bayou and Memorial Creek area where it can grow, but mostly it doesn't grow well in the Houston area. But rough-leaf dogwood does. Rough-leaf dogwood, anybody just beginning think they have a black thumb, no green thumb? Yeah, this is a plant that you should plant. If you think you don't have a green thumb, this one, you're going to have a hard time killing it. So it's a great plant. It's hardy. It's durable. It's good for birds. It's good for butterflies. It's good for pollinators. And it's easy to maintain. Once a year you clip the little suckers. It's not a problem. This brown thrasher loves the fruit of rough-leaf dogwood. We have this bird in the wintertime. There are a few during the springtime, but mostly we see it in the wintertime. This is one of my top 500 favorite birds. Eastern bluebird. Look how gorgeous this bird is. Now, you're not likely to attract this to your yard if you live in the inner loop, but this bird occurs out in Bear Creek Park. And I'm encouraging you to take this information and apply it not only to your yard, but to your local neighborhood, to local parks, to property that you own outside of Houston. You know, multiply the effect. And you may have, if you own property northeast of Houston or northwest of Houston, you may have bluebirds available that could use this plant. Another great plant to have is red bay. So this is what it looks like growing, and you can see it growing more around North Houston. It doesn't do so well pretty much south of I-10, but if you're north of I-10, it does better. It can grow, don't get me wrong, it can grow, but it's not normally found there. Here's the fruit. So it produces the fruit in the fall, and lots of birds will eat this fruit. This is what you might call the Cajun bay leaf. This is often used in, we see bay leaf in a lot of our spices. That's a different species. It's similar to this plant, but it's a European plant. But in Louisiana, they use this plant in their cooking. And just so you know, I like Cajun cooking. Okay, if you really want a stunning plant that's going to draw attention in the springtime, this American fringe tree. Awesome. Spectacular. I mean, it's just so stunning. It's unbelievable. Sometimes it's multi-trunk, as you see here. Other times it's single trunk. Either one is going to be beautiful. All right, now it does produce a seed casing. I don't know if I have. Here's the close-up of what the fringes look like. These are technically the flower structures. The flower is inside this clump of fringes, but it does produce a small seed casing that's eaten by birds, so it's a good plant. But it's just a great addition to a yard just for the aesthetics of it. Parsley leaf hawthorn. This is what the flower looks like in the springtime. It produces the fruit, the red fruit that you see, and of course many species of birds eat that. This plant likes filtered shade. It can grow under heavy shade also, but filtered shade is probably ideal for it. It can grow in almost any kind of soil conditions. Doesn't require a great deal of watering. Normal watering is all you need to take care of. And it's very light and airy, small. Typically only grows to about 12 feet tall, and not a heavy laden tree at all. So very suitable for growing underneath oak trees. We have two species of holly, what we call holly. The one on the right here with this bird, anybody know this bird? Yeah, okay, so we do have some resident robins that stay here year-round and actually breed here, but the vast majority of them come in the fall and in the winter. Guess when the fruit is ripe on this plant? All right, everybody at once? All right. When the birds come, that's when this fruit is ripe. So these birds will eat this fruit. You'll also find mockingbirds trying to chase the robins off. Cardinals will sometimes eat this fruit. Brown thrashers will eat this fruit. Other birds that migrate through, if it's ripe, they'll eat it. Now, the one on the left is Ilex deciduous, sometimes called possum haw holly. Anybody know that one? It's gorgeous. The berries come anywhere from yellowish to orangish and red. It typically loses most of its leaves in the wintertime. If it's a really cold winter, it probably loses all of its leaves. Whereas the Ilex vomitoria on the right is an evergreen. So if you need a plant that's going to act as a screen, that is, be evergreen, and also be good for birds, maybe you want to consider the Ilex vomitoria. If you don't need the screen, you may want to look at the decidua. I had the decidua in my backyard in the first house that I lived in, and it was like December 31st. We were scheduled to go on a sparrow class field trip on January the 1st, and it started raining on December the 31st, turned to sleet and ice, and my yopon was covered the next morning, covered in frozen berries. And so the trip was canceled. But I still had a great event that day because there was a flock of about 50 robins that descended on this popsicle tree and just devoured, I mean literally devoured all of those fruits. Now, there were two mockingbirds, a pair of mockingbirds that lived around the neighborhood that kept trying to chase those robins off, but they couldn't. And you may not see many birds eating them, but whenever they need them, they're there. Elderberry. This is a great little plant to have. I like the way it grows right here. Beautiful, large, massive flowers. So it's great for butterflies, great for pollinators. And we have a group of birds that, almost all birds eat insects. There are a few exceptions, but most land birds eat insects. So anytime you can attract insects to your yard, you're going to be providing habitat for those insect-eating birds. Anybody ever had any elderberry wine? Okay, so years ago people grew elderberry as a regular resource for themselves to make elderberry jelly and elderberry wine. Mexican plum. Beautiful. This is what it looks like on the right at a distance. Again, this is a great plant to grow in light shade or filtered shade. It can grow under heavier shade, but doesn't do quite as well. So just kind of factor that in when you buy and plant that. On the left, we have a bird called a cedar waxwing. And so what is a cedar waxwing doing in a Mexican plum? Well, this plant, along with eastern redbud, blooms early in the year, like as early as sometimes late February, March, April. By this time, fall and winter has already set in. Many of the fruits that are available have either rotted or been eaten, so there's a diminished resource of food available for birds. Birds, including cedar waxwing and lots of other birds, cardinals will do this, house finches that we have around here, mockingbirds, they will eat the young shoots that are just the buds that are just coming up on this tree. They'll eat the petals, they'll eat the pollen. I've even seen mockingbirds with yellow bibs from eating so much pollen. So it's a great plant to have. Again, we're talking about timing of food resources for birds. This would be an early spring for fresh, nice little salad fixings, if you will. Okay, now the cedar waxwing is named after what we call cedar, eastern red cedar, in fact, which is actually a juniper. And in the wintertime throughout the eastern United States, they feed a great deal on the cedar berries, okay, of the juniper, Junipers virginiana. So that's where they get the name cedar waxwing. What do we do with cedar berries? Anybody know? Oh, I know where y'all are coming from. Y'all know about what you get out of juniper berries, but you can't name these birds? Come on now. What's this bird? Read it over here. Okay, so this is another bird that eats a lot of fruit. Look at that big heavy-duty bill. It's a seed eater and a fruit eater and a few insects. This bird migrates through in the springtime and migrates through in the fall. So anything that you do, you can have this in your yard, this bird in your yard. I had it in my yard when I lived in Southwest Houston, Kirby and 59 area, had it in my yard up at 290 and West Road area. So it migrates through this area, as well as the indigo buntings and lots of others. Texas palmetto, if you like more of a tropical look, this is one of the tropical plants that we have. And you could use that as a foundation plant. Dig out those red-tip photinias and put in the Sabal minor. So how is Sabal minor good for birds? Well, as you can see here, here's the stalk right here. All right, so in the springtime, the stalk goes up and it has typical like cactus-type flowers or yucca-type flowers, really more like a yucca. If you've ever seen Thompson's yucca or what they call dagger yucca or Louisiana yucca, it's that type of flower. So it has that kind of a flower. It gets pollinated. Lots of bees use that, by the way. And then once the flower's pollinated, it sets the fruit. Here's the fruit right here. And many species, any kind of a fruit-eating bird, summer tanagers, scarlet tanagers, mockingbirds, cardinals, house finches, grosbeaks, buntings, they all eat this fruit. Lots of these are growing out in Bear Creek Park, Addicks Reservoir. Typically, these are in maybe 30 years or 40 years, they'll get to be about 8 feet tall. So they're very slow growing. If you have an area that gets flooded and maybe even has standing water sometimes, put this plant there, it can take it. Not a problem. They grow as far west as Austin area, so they're also drought tolerant. Austin gets far less rain than we do. So this is a good plant for a wet area, a flooding area, or just a normal ground area, any place. It can also grow in full sun or shade. If you need to put something in a shade, if you have lots of oak trees and you need have shade and you need a plant for shade, this is a great plant for shade. Oh, one of my favorite plants is this plant right here, Arrowwood viburnum. Look at the flower on this. It's gorgeous. Look at the leaf. I like different kinds of leaves. I like the structure of a leaf. So this has a beautiful leaf. In the fall and the winter, it has this fruit. It's kind of like about the size of a blueberry and the color of a blueberry. And it has beautiful red coloring in the fall. Now, this is a small growing, more of a shrub, what I consider a shrub. Typically, it grows anywhere from about 4 feet to 8 feet tall, usually around 5 or 6 feet. Can grow in light sun, also heavy shade. So anywhere from light sun to heavy shade grows. If you need something a little bit larger and you like this idea, guess what? There's a cousin. This rusty blackhaw viburnum, which is a larger shrub sometimes, or even a tree. So either rusty blackhaw viburnum or viburnum dentatum, arrowwood viburnum. Great for birds, great for pollinators. Anybody have this in your yard? Great, great. Not enough of you. Oh, that one's out of order? No. Oh, going the wrong way, sorry. Okay, so here are some of the birds that migrate through here. They're migrating through right now. They're southbound, headed to Mexico, Central America, and South America. But they'll be coming. So you have time now to plant the plants in the fall that you buy today and get ready for them to come back in the spring. So in the top left, we have the prothonotary warbler. On the right, we have the beautiful, handsome, male chestnut-sided warbler. Over on the far left, we have northern parula. This bird breeds down in Brazos Bend. Actually, the two on the left breed in Brazos Bend State Park. So you can see those in the springtime or summertime down there breeding. And this beautiful black and white warbler. You would not think that just two basic colors, and some people even consider that they're not colors, black and white, would be so gorgeous. But when you see this bird, it's just stunningly beautiful. It's awesome. The photo doesn't even do it justice, but that's all we have. Wood thrush. Remember I talked about earlier how you can't create the structure, micro habitat that allows birds to have some shelter to get under. This is the bird that likes to be underneath plants, underneath trees, underneath shrubs, in that little secluded area, wood thrush. They're migrating through right now, and it has we're probably not going to hear it singing in the fall, but sometimes in the spring you can hear them singing, just absolutely gorgeous. So once you get your yards planted, you can have them certified. There's 2 places to have them certified, and actually there's a third coming, I think, pretty soon with Houston Audubon. But right now we have the Texas Wildscapes, which Diana Foss is the person who's primarily responsible for getting this Wildscape started. And I see Dinah back there. Dinah, thank you. So you can have your yard certified with Texas Wildscapes, and then National Wildlife Federation also has a certification program. So you can have the yard certified that way and share it with other people. So I'm amazed that I finished on time, and so I'll take any questions that people may have. If not, we're going to have a mad dash to get the plants.